Right, so this video is not a subject that a lot of people probably would like to talk about, but it's about death. Reason being is this last fortnight we've had two sort of deaths close to us. One was a pet, so I know a lot of people, uh, think, well, it's only a pet, it's not as important as a person. And then there's some other people that think the pets, are family and are, just as important as a family member. So I'll go into the backstory, of other people, but this year so far. Today is Friday, the 24th of January, and it was last week on Thursday, I think it was. We had a phone call to say that a close family friend of ours, passed away in hospital. Hopefully, you can hear me saying this. I've got a microphone here, but because the one in the computer isn't great. Hopefully you can hear this anyway. I have got something else in the background which is quite loud, so anyway. But yeah, to say a close family friend that I'd known personally for, when was it, about 2008 I think I first knew them. So 12 years, for me. And they're actually instrumental, if that's the right word, in me and my partner meeting. The person that died, well, obviously I'm not going to name any names here, just to keep it clean and, free from any possible, whatever. Can't think of the word, sorry, but anyway. So yeah, the person that passed away last week was not responsible, sorry, but instrumental. The person actually drove my now partner to meet me 12 years ago, which is when I met the person that passed away. So if that person hadn't have driven the partner to where I am, we probably wouldn't have been how we are now. Life would have been different because I wasn't driving, so I couldn't get there. I know you could get the train, but then, all those years ago, I wasn't train savvy. I'm still not really train savvy now. Don't really use trains as much, but things were, anyway. However, things were different then, and that just happened to be how it happened. So that was last Thursday. We were told that they passed away. Then this Tuesday night, we noticed a problem with our leopard gecko, which is a smaller version of sort of the more popular bearded dragon. So, it's a lot smaller, but reptile like a bearded dragon. Noticed a problem, well, a couple of problems actually. A few years back, maybe 3 years now, we took the leopard gecko, which was called Oscar, to a reptile vet's, which the nearest one to here at that time was about an hour's drive away. So that in itself presented its own set of circumstances, because obviously you have to keep them warm, for that journey. So anyway, took that because he had a problem. He had something in his eye that we couldn't get out, so it needed an operation to do it safely. That was a few £100, and then I think it's about 300 or something. And then the other day, as I say, on the Wednesday, we noticed he possibly did the same thing again with his eye, but he also had another problem. So we took him to the vets on that Wednesday morning, and unfortunately we had to have him put down because it was going to be quite expensive to do. We'd possibly already the infection had set in, which this particular thing, obviously the reptiles, I know I'm not explaining myself very well here and it's all going around, but reptiles obviously have to be kept in a heated enclosure. But because of that, the problem that he had, the sort of area of the body, if it was kept wet, it was fine. But if it dried out, it could get infection. Obviously, it was wet to start with, but as soon as the problem happened, being in the heated enclosure, the heat dried up the area, so infection had soon possibly got in. So that would have caused, so his eye and that and something else. So there was quite a few £100 it was going to be, at least. I'm not entirely sure how much it would have been, but it was easier for us because if it was infected, that would have to be then amputated, and then there could be further problems, along the line. We had 7 years with Oscar, so people think, how do you get attached to your pets? Well, obviously you do. 7 years is a long time. If that was a person you knew for 7 years, it would still be incredibly, it would be incredibly wrenching to not have them there anymore if they were close to you. So, right, I'll go back to the start of, this whole sort of my experiences of death. Up until 2017, I hadn't experienced a family member's death. I had another pet when I was a lot younger, maybe about 9 or something like that passed away. And I had, which was a bird, a cockatiel. And then I had a dog, which I think was 2014. I hope I'm right in saying that. I haven't actually written anything down, so this is just off the top of my head. But I think it was 2014, and we had a dog, and he'd been with us for 12 years. So, and he was sort of the only dog that I'd ever had. And so that was incredibly sad. It really was. When we had to have him put down, he got cancer. And it was in his anal glands and things like that. And they could operate. They told us they could operate, but if they operated and it wasn't a success, it could leave him incontinent for the rest of his life. However long that may be, after that. And he had, I suppose you call it an abscess, on the anal area. That could have operated, but it could have caused incontinence, which obviously wouldn't be very, good for him, from his hygiene point of view. And obviously would have to clean it all the time, it would, it could have been everywhere. So that wasn't going to be very nice, obviously, having him incontinent. And it was actually causing him a lot of pain at that, as it progressed, it was causing him a lot of pain, and there was a lot of blood regularly from, obviously, his bottom. And it wasn't nice to see him like that, if you'd have kept him like that, obviously without operating, we didn't want to operate because we didn't want him to be incontinent. And if you'd have kept him as he was in pain, and you could tell he was in pain, he would often sort of not bark, but sort of murmur, make noises and whining, and it really wasn't nice to experience. You could tell that he was hurt and upset himself. I know people say, oh, dogs, how do you know if your dog's whatever, but you could tell he wasn't enjoying life much, he really didn't have much of a life. So in the end, when we did actually, because obviously he wasn't going to get better on his own, it was cancer, and as I say, they could have removed it, but that could have caused all sorts of problems. In the end, we couldn't face taking him into the vets, because of the sort of state he was in with the blood, and his general lethargicness. We couldn't face taking him into the vets, so we actually managed to get them to come out to the house. I didn't stay in the room when he was put to sleep. Obviously, I said my goodbyes, and I think it was my mum and my partner stayed with him. When it actually happened, and obviously then I didn't want to see him being taken out to the vet's car, because that would have been horrible, So as I say, I said my goodbyes. I left the room. It happened. Then he was taken away. Obviously, we got his ashes. So that was like 2014. 2017. This is my first experience of a human death. Me and my grandma were incredibly close. I live about 10 miles from each other, but friendship-wise, relationship-wise, very close. And she'd always been an ill woman. She'd never been sort of 100% healthy. She had various health problems throughout her life. She had Crohn's disease and various other things. She had macular degeneration, which is sorry about that, a problem with her eyesight. You know, she was on the verge of being blind. You know, she really didn't have much eyesight left. So you know, she had various complications. She ended up going to hospital a few times towards the end of her life. And I remember once we were at her house, and she'd been in bed. I don't think she'd moved much. You know, she'd been in bed not very well at all. And the ambulance came. You know, they came, said we'll have to take her in. You know, and I think she was in pain as well. You know, so they took her in. And the following morning, obviously, I wasn't expecting anything of it because she'd been in hospital. You know, as I say, quite a few times before. I wasn't expecting anything different. I wasn't expecting it to be the last time that I saw her alive. So my mum got a phone call the next morning, which was about, I think it was just after 8 or something like that. As I say, I'm sorry I haven't written any dates or times down, but this was just an off-the-cuff video. So yeah, we got the phone call, and my mum got the phone call, should I say, to say, would you like to come, well, I think you should come to the hospital, sorry, to come and see your mum. You know, something like that. As I say, I wasn't on the phone call, so it was something like that. So my brother went in his separate car, and then I think it was me, my mum, my dad and partner went in my car. Sorry, not in my car, in my dad's car. So we got to the hospital, and obviously they'd told us, you know, you'd like to come in. So she took us into the family room. Obviously I've never experienced anything like this before, so I wasn't expecting any of it. Took us into the family room and said, I'm sorry to say that she passed away. Obviously, as I say, again, I'm trying not to give names, but sorry to tell you that she passed away. Sorry. Passed away. God, sorry. A couple of hours ago. So, obviously then, instant floods of tears, instant despair, really. Because obviously I wasn't expecting it. My mum had mentioned later, you know, that she thought that might be the case. So we then got taken into the room that she was in. She was in a separate room, obviously. And we were just all a mess, you know, an absolute mess, you know. Because, you know, we just couldn't believe it. And obviously she laid there on the bed, they'd brushed her hair, you know, obviously got her looking decent, you know. Obviously all the hospital wires and everything were gone, you know, everything. She just laid there peaceful. And as I say, I just kept bursting into tears because of, obviously, we were very close, as I say, but then thinking about the things that, you know, we'd not be going to a house. Well, we would be going to a house again because obviously I still had a granddad, but, you know, we'd not be doing the various things that she was known for. You know, she was known for baking and obviously having a nice, you know, having a nice tidy home. I was visiting her, you know, speaking with her, talking about all sorts, talking about family life, family problems. She was the person to go to, you know, when you wanted to have like a release. So her not being there anymore was incredibly hard for me to come to terms with. And obviously, as I say, this was the first experience of human death for me. At the funeral, which I think was about a fortnight later, I did read a reading, my own words, you know, I wrote a eulogy and read it out, as well as my Uncle Pete, he read something, and I think my cousin, I've said one name there, sorry about that, I didn't mean to come out, but yeah, one of my uncles and I think one of my cousins said something. As soon as I started to read it, you know, I think the first line was something like, first of all, I'd just like to say what an amazing woman my grandma was, something like that. And as soon as I started, you know, I was like, and there was hesitation in my voice, you know, upset in my voice, tears, and my uncle was behind me, you know, watching if I couldn't carry on. And it was an awful day, you know, it was an awful time. And I really didn't think I would ever get over it, you know, because she was such a wonderful woman and made a huge impact on me. And I actually have a health condition, which is, I have mentioned in one of my previous videos ages back. And it would have resulted, or could have resulted in me needing to go on dialysis. And she actually said that she would buy a dialysis machine to have at home. so that I didn't have to go to hospital 3 or 4 times a week, or how many times a week. I think it was £30,000 at the time a machine would have been, but she didn't bat an eyelid. She would have done that for me. Yeah, and she was a very generous woman, very generous, to the family. But that was, as I say, it was certainly not a nice point in life. I think that was 2017. So then we moved on to 2018. I think I'm right in saying, yeah, when one of my uncles, he had never been ill, as far as I'm aware, in his life. Not properly, not went into hospital ill. I don't know if he'd ever had any operations. He was in his 70s, and I think the previous year had been into hospital for something, but I can't remember what it was for. But I know that I remember me and my dad going to see him in hospital, and then we went to see him while he was in hospital this time round in 2018, and they said that his kidney percentage or something was drastically low, and there was something else, can't quite remember now, that was quite bad. But he'd come out of hospital, things were on the up, I think. And then a little bit later on, sorry, a little bit later on, he'd got taken back again, and we'd been to see him in the interim, to his house, and seen him and his dog, and but yeah, in the interim. And then we got a phone call, we'd say, oh, he's back in hospital. And then a little bit later, I think it was maybe a fortnight, something like that. Was that why he's still in hospital, And then we got a phone call to say he passed away. And that as well, I was close to my uncle as well. We used to go around his house, if not every Sunday. We tried to, every Sunday or every other Sunday, and spend a few hours, at his house with him, me and my dad. And he had shared interests with us. One of the time we had a boat at the marina, and he had a boat as well. And, various interests like that. He made model boats, which I still have one. He made one for me. I asked him, and he made one for me. It's back at my parents' house. So, and I think he was, as I say, he was in his 70s. But that was completely out of the blue. I wasn't, because they said about the kidneys and stuff like that, but then I wasn't expecting him, to pass away. So that really was quite a shock, really. My grandma was in her late 80s, I want to say, late 80s, whereas, as I say, he was in his 70s, and he hadn't been in hospital on various things, but then when he'd gone in, so he had a dog, which he left behind, he had a dog left behind, that went to his son. And it's just weird, when obviously someone's been around there, for that long and you're that close to them. And we used to go to boat jumbles, basically car boots, but with boat stuff. We took him a couple of times to those. And he was really cheeky, really fun. Made jokes about all sorts. Stuff you probably wouldn't and shouldn't make jokes about sometimes, but it really, was fun to be around. And I remember at his funeral that his daughters, they said that he always made a lot of me and said a lot about me. I didn't read at his funeral. That was actually, my grandma was a cremation. This was a burial. I didn't read at his funeral because they sort of all sorted it amongst themselves, whereas, my grandma's was more, a different way of sorting things out. But yeah, at his funeral, he was in a church, and it was a burial after. So, that was the first burial as well I've been to see, which is certainly different to cremation. There's certainly a different feel to it. When the churchyard, his wife had died, I think maybe 15 years ago now or something. So he'd been on his own for quite a while, which is why we started going after he lost his wife. That was the reason we was going. Sorry. Should have got a drink. The computer, sorry about that. So that was then. 2019, in February, so nearly a year ago now, I lost my granddad. He was... I'd never been really close to him, and I have to say that, a lot of the family weren't really close to him. But since, obviously, my grandma, his wife, died, we did get a bit closer, and he was diagnosed with cancer. I think it was... I'm not sure if it was bowel and bladder. I don't know, one of them. I don't want to say which one, but it was definitely one of them. But that time I was, along with my mum, was one of the people that took him for his cancer radiotherapy the most. And obviously through doing that we got quite close. Not really close, but we got closer than we had been. I'd never found it easy to talk to him. Because, he didn't open up. It wasn't somebody you could just easily have a conversation with. But obviously being that close then, actually taking him, every week or 2 or 3 times a week, for that, we did get closer and we were able to talk easier, about stuff. And I don't think I was there for his cancer diagnosis, but I did go with him, to a couple of his follow-up appointments as well after he'd had the radiotherapy, when they were seeing if things had improved. And I don't think he got the all clear entirely, but they said that they had managed to get most of it wasn't a tumour, I don't think it was, I can't remember what they called it now, they didn't say, I don't think it was a tumour, but there was like an area or a mass, but that was radiotherapy, not chemotherapy. But he did start getting better, he did finish his radiotherapy, and it wasn't having any more, but then he did get a lot of the side effects of the radiotherapy, which made him really very ill. The side effects made him ill. And I think it was a year's worth of radiotherapy he had. That was at Castle Hill Hospital in Cottingham near Hull. And he lived in Lincolnshire. It was about nearly an hour to get there, maybe 40 minutes an hour, I think, from his to the treatment. And he always he was one of the strongest men I knew or know. He always put a brave face on things. He was always happy. When, as far as I was aware, he didn't didn't get down in the dumps with me or anything. Sorry, I'm just seeing how the lights certainly going. And but yeah, so it was the side effects that mainly really sort of affected him, and he did get very ill, and it got to a point where my mum and one of my aunties was actually staying with him at his house and looking after him there. Rather than carers coming in, they were going in looking after him and washing him and various things, because he was just too fragile, basically. He was in lots of pain towards the end, sort of with various things. And he did go into hospital a couple of times, sort of. I know his kidneys were being affected as well. After he'd had his radiotherapy, his kidneys did start having problems, and then they started to get better, started to get worse again. He went into hospital for various things, came out again, and he was at home when he passed away. But I wasn't there when he passed away, but I was telling you that it was in quite a fair amount of pain. They'd given him various, pain, I can't remember what they call it now, something driver for pain relief, which he was using pretty much constantly because he was in loads of pain apparently. So that obviously wasn't a nice thing to hear of. But he passed in his sleep. He passed away in his sleep. Just bear with me, I'm just going to pop the light on if I can find something. Just bear with me a second. That's better. Yeah, so when he passed away in his sleep. Thankfully, you know, it wasn't sort of an agonising pain when he passed away. He was asleep. And obviously since then, he'd always looked after my grandma. And I remember, just going back, I remember at my grandma's funeral, one of my uncles, saying that she'd been in the best care home and had the best carer that she could have ever had, which was my granddad. So yeah, he'd cared for her, all her life, when she was ill at home. And then obviously my mum and auntie cared for him when he was at home, when he needed the help. And obviously they were devastated, as we all were, to lose another family member, obviously. To lose their, obviously I have no grandparents now, they have no parents. It was certainly a dark time, and thinking about it now, it is awful. As I say, it's nearly a year now. And obviously they're not child at home, but they lived, obviously, when they were younger, they lived obviously with them in the house that they had for many years. But that's just sold now, just before Christmas, that sold. Well, it actually sold back in March, I think it was. But it's taken up until just before Christmas for not the solicitors on my grandfather's, but the ones buying it, their solicitors and other things. It's taken just nearly a year to get sorted for the house to actually, keys to be handed over. So, as I say, pets and my grandparents, one of my uncles, and then, as I say, this year, our family friend. Now, he has had probably not the, well, yeah, certainly not a very easy life the last 6 or 7 years. As I say, I had known him about 12 years, and my partner had known him a few years more than that when he moved to Scarborough, which is where his family friend lived. And to just go back a few years, what started sort of health problems with this family friend, as I'm trying not to name names just so it's clear and, not naming. But yeah, so I think it was about 2015, 2016. My partner lived a couple of doors down from this family friend. And my partner still had family there at the time. So they hadn't actually seen this family friend, I think, for a couple of days or a few days. They tried the door, and there was no answer. So they ended up getting the police, and I think it was the fire brigade that broke down the door. This family friend was lying at the back of the door. He'd fallen or collapsed, and he couldn't get up to answer the door, couldn't get up to the door, couldn't get to a phone. So he'd been stuck there behind the door for maybe 2 or 3 days, something like that. And what happened as a result of that, he had an infection in his leg, and they had no other option but to amputate one of his legs. So initially he went to York Hospital when they were doing all sorts of things, they were doing the tests. He really was incredibly ill, he had a really bad infection. He wasn't very well at all. And as I say, the only option was amputation. So when he was in York Hospital, which is where he first went, and he lived in Scarborough at the time, and we live about 30 miles from York, 50 miles from Scarborough. We went to York 2 or 3 times each week if we could. Because he had no other family, nobody else was there for him. We were the only ones visiting, we were the only ones to see him in the hospital. So we would go there, we would get his washing, bring it home, do his washing for him, take him books, things to do while he was in hospital. I can't think how long he was in hospital at York for now, but he was in a fair while, and he did have his leg amputated. And I remember us taking him at some point in his wheelchair outside, to get some fresh air. And he was always very appreciative, he really was. it told us that it would have rather died there, left behind the thing. If it had died, then it would have been okay, But then, obviously, we were, there for him, and this is sort of the beginning of us being there properly for him, because he'd not seen his family in at least 20 years, any of his family in at least 20 years, and his wife had died. She sadly had schizophrenia. His wife had died a few years before I knew them, so he was on his own. And obviously, he didn't have anything at that point, he thought, to live for. He had no family, no friends really that he could rely on. So, we were there. Eventually got transferred to, I think it was Bridlington Hospital first. Because I know he went to Scarborough Hospital, then Brid, then back to Scarborough, and there was all sorts of messing with him. But anyway, eventually he got into some sort of care home. Obviously, it was, I think, with the vision to eventually go back into a home of his own. But they found out that his house, which was a Victorian terraced house, over 100 years old, it was too, without spending an absolute fortune, it wasn't able to be modified properly for him being in this wheelchair. The hallways were too narrow, for him when he was in this wheelchair. But he, in and out, in the different hospitals, he went through all sorts of infections, all sorts of problems. They did think at one point that his other leg might have to be amputated. But yeah, so eventually he got into this care home, which we, obviously my partner has other family in Scarborough, so we kept going to see in the care home there. He hated it, didn't like being in there, obviously, because apart from obviously having, one leg and being in a wheelchair, there wasn't really, an awful lot wrong. He could still do a fair amount for himself. So he was in there, I don't know how long he was in there, maybe a couple of years, something like that. But then they found out that that would be shutting, that care home would be shutting, and he'd have to find elsewhere. Well, then at that time they were building some new sort of, not warden control, but it was a block of apartments where you had your own, and you paid for the rent with your pension, and your, if you want any benefits and stuff like that, that paid your rent. It was for over 65s anyway, this place. It was a specialist place where there was nurses there if you needed medical help. But if you didn't, you had your own flat, there was a restaurant, various things. So yeah, he did end up actually getting one of these. He was put in for one, and he did get one of his own. Sadly, in there, and in the previous care home, there was a woman, I'll not name her name, just to be fair, but there's a woman, we always thought she was very nice. Your typical old lady, smiling face, happy, cheery. But, obviously, the family friend was always looking for companionship. He missed, obviously, his wife, and he was looking for companionship. And this is what we feel, anyway. So, he got close friends with this woman in there. And, they would go out together, to the local shops or on the, the minibus type of thing. And we didn't know then, but there was another person that became involved, which was somebody our family friend met through, I'm not entirely sure, through his wife was a chef, I think, at the original care home. So they sort of all became pally and friends somehow around about that. Anyway, while he was at this apartment place, his own little place, and being friendly and pally with him, they noticed that, I don't know how it came out now. I think it was a thing like people were saying, oh, why did you get yourself this? And he was saying, well, I haven't got any money. Or what did you, Anyway, somehow now, I can't think entirely how, but our friend let this other friend, whose wife was the chef, look into his bank. Sorry, that was it, yes, I do remember. This other one was looking after the banking of our family friend, because obviously there was all sorts going on, and it was just easier for this other one to sort through it for him. And he noticed there was money, loads and loads of money coming out, often, big purchases, but hats, like, not wedding hats, but fancy hats, or expensive meals, or expensive microwaves, kettles, furniture, sofas, which our family friend wouldn't have, use of. We'd actually given him some of our, we'd actually given him some of the things to get him set up in his flat apartment. Anyway, so, he was noticing all his money went out, and he actually asked our family friend, what's this for? And what's this for? And our family friend couldn't, say what they were for. He said, well, I can't remember, I don't remember spending that. But it actually turned out that our family friend had given this woman who he'd got close to his card. And whenever they were going out shopping together, if there was something she wanted, she'd say, oh, that's nice, to our family friend. And him being the kind, generous person that he was, he would say, oh, you can get it. But she was, obviously because he didn't have control of his bank accounts, he would never know that he had less and less money. So anyway, in the end, this other person had said to the woman that was there, he said, how come Peter's, where's a lot of his money gone, something like that. And at the time, or one of the times, we'd actually got a new car. Not a brand new car, second-hand car, part exchange. And this woman had said, well, the two boys, because obviously we were there, the two boys have got a new car, and maybe he's given them some money towards a car. And but anyway, long story short, she was taking all of his money. When they went out for meals, it was him always spending it. When she got any new clothes, it was his money. She got new wardrobes in her flat because they ended up going into the same place together. She spent all his money on her wardrobes, a new bed, a new mattress, new bedside cabinets. His flat, our family friend, hardly, apart from the stuff we'd given him, and the stuff that obviously the place had of its own anyway, the fitted kitchen, things like that, there was nothing. In her flat there was lamps, bedside tables, sofas, and different sofas each time. She would have one for a little while and then get another one, and she'd always say, oh, do you like my new sofa? And told us, do you like my new sofa? Do you like my bed? Do you like my bedding? We never suspected anything. And it was only until this other one stepped in and looked at his finances and realised that it was that. We tried to tell our family friend a couple of times, but he never really took it on board. Like, we'd tell him 1 minute, but then he would either not believe us or couldn't believe it, and I don't think he wanted to believe it, because obviously he wanted that companionship. There was one time when we went to his flat in this place, we knocked on his door, there was no answer, which usually meant if there was no answer on his, this was before we found out everything, we would go around to hers because he would be there. And we knocked on the door, and there was nothing. We used the doorbell, there was nothing. We heard them inside, we could clearly hear them in the flat. There was, knocking, and we left. We'd driven an hour and 10 minutes to get there. We left with no answer because, they wouldn't answer the door. We actually even went down to reception and said, we can hear them in the flat, but they're not answering the door. And this was completely out of the blue. We'd been fine with them. They'd been fine with us, we'd been fine with them. Completely out of the blue. And they rang up, and we stood outside of the door. Yeah? And we heard the reception phone call say, is Peter there? And she said, this woman, no, I haven't seen him all day. I don't know where he is. On the intercom. And put the phone down. And we could hear him, because he had an electric wheelchair at that point, and you could hear him, because he had a distinctive, deep voice, and you could hear the wheelchair. And we were absolutely, and I mean absolutely cut up about it. We'd been shut out. We had absolutely no reason why. Nothing had changed since the last time. But that was the start of when she actually managed to get her claws in, and the money was being taken. And as I say, it wasn't until this other one had found everything out that, that's what was happening. I can't think now if the police had been called, but obviously she denied everything. But anyway, then obviously ended up having no money in the end. So he came out of there and he was put into another residential care home which is where he was until he passed away. Well, until he then went into hospital again early this year and passed away. But, you know, I would never ever get over, you know, that woman doing that to him. You know, she left him with absolutely nothing, used him. That is all she did. She used him completely. You know, that is absolutely what she did. She used him for everything she could get. And when there was no money left, she didn't want to know. You know, because a few times he'd gone, you know, to him and say, you know, are you alright? Are you alright? And I said, then sorry. Are you alright? And she would shut him out because that's when the money stopped. When the money stopped, she shut him out, and he had no idea why. You know, I said, oh, that's strange. I don't know why she's cutting me off, you know, shutting me out. But it was because the money had stopped. She'd been rumbled. But nothing ever came of it. So yeah, then he ended up in this other residential care home, which we still visit him, obviously, every time we went. Which, this last couple of years, actually been diagnosed with vascular dementia. So we're worried, you know, each time we'd see him, you know, would he still remember us? Would he still know our names? And there's only a couple of times which initially, you know, he didn't. You know, he recognised us, but he couldn't remember our names straight off. But yeah, and you know, in the end, the last time we saw him, which was just before Christmas, we obviously, you know, we said to him, you know, we'd take him when the weather was better. We'd take him, you know, because it was still Scarborough. You know, we'd take him on the cliff tops, you know, near the thing, you know, get something nice to eat, you know, or maybe go to the beach or, you know, something. And he'd said that whether it was dementia, you know, but he always repeated himself quite a bit, which that is, you know, that's dementia, fair enough. But, you know, he said that he had no friends in the care home, you know, he hated life there. You know, he didn't want to be in there anymore. You know, he said this isn't an existence, this isn't a life, it's just an existence. You know, you get up, you have your routine, do whatever, and go to bed again, it's the same the next day. So he was hating it in there. But then, as I say, it was still completely unexpected when I got that phone call to say he'd passed away. And, you know, the last time we saw him was December, I think. So we just hope that, you know, now he's free of pain, he's free of anybody being able to take his money. We don't know yet as yet when the funeral will be, if there'll be one, because obviously sometimes they might just do the family which apparently have managed to get in contact with now, might just want a direct cremation, which if they do, fair enough. If they do have a funeral, obviously wherever it is, we'll go to it and we'll see the family and talk to them about Peter, because they haven't seen him for 20 years, so we'll be able to fill them in. And it's just the, you know, the end of another chapter for another person. So, as I say, his life certainly hasn't been easy, you know, over the last few years. Most of it, as I say, with the woman, he was unaware of, really. Or he didn't want to believe it. But yeah, when he was in hospital a few times, you know, he had a couple of infections. And when we were telling him, you know, he couldn't remember various things. And he says, oh, she wouldn't do that to me. Which, you know, looking at the statements, we knew she had, because obviously he wouldn't be buying hats, you know, and he wouldn't be buying microwaves or sofas, you know, and three-piece suites and bedroom furniture. So, you know, and then there was other things like makeup or, you know, which clearly, you know, as I say, she never think any of it. But you always hear of younger people taking advantage of older people. But we couldn't believe it. You know, that a fellow 70-odd-year-old, 80-odd-year-old woman could do that to him. So yeah, sadly, that, as I say, the end of another chapter. Whenever the funeral is, we'll go to it, and hopefully, you know, now he's at rest. So I was going to say, I know this has been an incredibly long video, and I didn't intend it to be this long. But if you have been, thanks for watching.